And Javon, I want to come to you because, I mean, you're his friend. You were on the island on the 4th. You were on a different boat. Do you recall seeing him at all that day?
Yes, ma'am. I did see him when I was out there on the island.
Can you tell me what you saw? Does anything seem strange to you about the difference that people are saying of how he was separated from the group?
Operated as a team. And since they went out there as a team, and it hasn't been made clear to me whether or not they came back together as a team, all 30 white youth and all 3 boats should have been part of this investigation, not just the 1 boat. That is my first big issue with this case. Who decided to separate the other 2 boats and the other 20 or so youth? I got a problem with that, Art, because according to the Cajun Navy, they have no GPS information on the other 2 boats, Art. They have no GPS information on the other 2 boats. Now let's get into this. According to Warren and Nolan's other so-called white friends, they decided to leave the island around 4:30. So they were roughly on White Devil's Horn Island from 11:30 to 4:30. That is about 5 hours. About 5 hours. Now, one question that has to be asked, Art, why did y'all leave so soon? Because they party on Horn Island all day long. Y'all didn't leave at sunset. Y'all didn't leave at sundown. Y'all left after only being there 5 hours. That's a little suspicious, Art. And I haven't heard anybody ask any of them, why did y'all decide to leave after only being there for 5 hours?
A boat leaves a private dock in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a few minutes before 10 in the morning. 18-year-old Nolan Wells is on board. It is the 4th of July. 2 days later, his body is recovered from the water near Horn Island. More than a month after that, nobody has been charged with anything. The state's autopsy is finished. It is sealed. A grand jury will decide what happens next, and nobody outside that room knows when. Into that silence walked a fake toxicology report. Then AI-generated videos of Nolan's own family, spreading faster than his mother could flag them. Then, after a month of saying nothing, one of the most watched commentators online broke his silence and delivered an hour of accusations aimed at named, still uncharged teenagers. That interview has been viewed by millions of people. Almost none of what it claimed has been confirmed by anyone with a badge, a subpoena, or a lab report. This is where we draw the line most true crime channels won't, between what a case file says and what a microphone says. Stay with us, because the difference between those 2 things is the whole story tonight. Before this became a case, a controversy, and eventually a hashtag, Nolan Xavier Wells was a teenager from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a small coastal city just east of Biloxi. He graduated from Ocean Springs High School in 2025. That fall, he enrolled at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he played wide receiver for the football team. Friends and coaches who spoke publicly after his death described a young man who was well-liked, active in his community, and close with his mother, Christine Wells Wansley, and his stepfather, Elmore Wansley. On the evening of July 3rd, the night before Independence Day, Nolan made his family salmon for dinner. His mother would later describe that final goodbye simply, a hug, a kiss, and he left to spend the night with friends ahead of the holiday. It is worth sitting with that detail for a moment, because everything that follows, the interviews, the lawsuits, the online battles, started as something much smaller and much sadder. A mother said goodbye to her son on an ordinary night before a holiday, and he did not come home. The following morning, Nolan joined a group of friends for a boating trip to Horn Island, a barrier island roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. Horn Island is not a place you live. It is a federally protected wilderness area. No roads, no buildings, no cell towers, no way off except by boat. People go there to swim, to camp for the day, to celebrate holidays exactly the way this group was doing. By the time the sun went down on the 4th of July, Nolan Wells was not with them. Let's be precise about what is actually documented, because precision is the entire point of this segment. According to data released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat carrying part of the group left the private dock in the Ocean Springs area at approximately 9:56 in the morning on July 4th. Multiple friends were aboard, including Warren Hudson, who has said publicly, in a later podcast appearance, that a large number of people traveled out to the island that day across more than one boat. By roughly noon, a Marine Patrol Master Sergeant with the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources had been asked to locate and interview people described as possibly connected to a missing person on Horn Island. Nolan had been reported missing that evening after he failed to return with the group. Search efforts continued through July 5th, including drone flights over the island by the Marine Resources Department. On the morning of July 6th, Nolan's body was found in the water near Horn Island. Jackson County Sheriff Lone Ledbetter said early in the investigation that authorities had found no signs of foul play. That statement drew heavy criticism in the following weeks, both from the Wells family's legal team and from members of the public who felt it was issued before the investigation had gone far enough to say anything definitively. Since then, according to reporting from the Sun-Herald, investigators have interviewed approximately 60 witnesses. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office has said that all evidence in the case, the autopsy, the toxicology results, witness statements, will remain sealed until it is presented to a grand jury. That grand jury will be the body that decides whether any of it supports criminal charges against anyone. As of the most recent public reporting, no charges have been filed against any individual in connection with Nolan Wells's death. No one has been named an official suspect by Jackson County investigators. Under the law, and under the standard this channel holds itself to, every person connected to that boat trip is entitled to the presumption of innocence unless and until that changes. One of the most unusual features of this case is that there are two separate autopsy investigations running at the same time. The first is the official autopsy conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office. That autopsy is complete. Its findings have not been released to the public. Under the district attorney's stated plan, that report, along with the rest of the case evidence, stays sealed until a grand jury reviews it. The second autopsy was commissioned independently by the Wells family, through their attorney, Benjamin Crump, and conducted by a forensic pathologist the family hired directly. The results of that independent examination were announced publicly on July 22nd during a press conference at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago. The stated conclusion from that independent review was that Nolan's cause and manner of death remained undetermined, pending further investigation. It is important to say plainly what that finding does and does not mean. Undetermined is not a synonym for homicide. It is not a synonym for accident, either. It is a formal acknowledgement that, based on what that examiner had available to review, the evidence did not yet point conclusively in one direction. Independent pathologists reach that conclusion regularly in cases involving water recovery, decomposition, and delayed access to tissue samples. It is a data point, not a verdict. Family members and their legal team have also raised specific procedural concerns about the handling of tissue samples, the timeline of the search, and communication from investigators. Those are legitimate questions for a family to ask publicly, and they are different in kind from unverified claims about what specifically happened to Nolan on that island, made by people with no access to the sealed file at all. We'll return to that distinction, because it is the hinge this whole episode turns on. For now, here is what we can say with confidence. 2 examinations have been performed. One is sealed. One says the manner of death is not yet determined. Neither has produced a public finding of homicide, and neither has produced a public finding of accidental drowning. The case remains, officially, unresolved. Within days of Nolan's death becoming national news, the case ran into a problem that has become depressingly familiar in the social media era. The actual, confirmed information moved slower than the fake information. A fabricated toxicology report began circulating online, claiming to show results from Nolan's autopsy. It was not real. State officials had to issue a public statement denouncing it, explicitly stating that no toxicology results had been released. By the time that correction reached the same audience the fake report had reached, the damage was largely done. The false numbers had already been screenshotted, reposted, and treated as fact by thousands of accounts. Around the same time, AI-generated videos began appearing that depicted members of Nolan's own family, including footage that never happened and words they never said. Christine Wells Wansley, a mother in the middle of the worst month of her life, found herself in the position of having to personally flag and report fabricated videos using her own image and her son's name, on top of everything else she was carrying. This is worth pausing on, because it is not a side issue. It is central to understanding everything that came after. In the absence of a released autopsy, a completed investigation, or any official word from Jackson County, an information vacuum formed. And into that vacuum rushed exactly the kind of content that performs best on social platforms: certainty, outrage, and villains with names attached. Millions of views were generated by content built around a young man who cannot correct the record about himself, and around a family that was simultaneously grieving and fact-checking strangers online. That is the environment this case has existed in for more than a month. It's the environment any coverage of this case has to be measured against, including the interview we're about to discuss. For nearly a month after Nolan Wells's death became national news, one of the internet's most watched independent commentators, Dr. Umar Johnson, said nothing publicly about the case. He later explained that decision in his own words, describing his reluctance to add his voice to what he saw as a rush of people arriving at a grieving family's worst moment for attention rather than out of genuine concern, drawing a comparison to the media environment that surrounded Ferguson and Baltimore in years past. That changed roughly a month after Nolan's death, when Johnson released a long-form interview devoted entirely to the case. It has since been viewed by millions of people and become, by itself, one of the most discussed pieces of media in the entire Nolan Wells story. Here is what we can accurately describe about that interview, in categories, because lumping it all together would misrepresent it. Procedural questions. A significant portion of the interview was devoted to raising questions about how the investigation was conducted, why evidence gathering appeared to focus on one boat rather than all of the vessels involved in the group outing, why GPS tracking data was not publicly confirmed for every boat, and why Nolan was reportedly left on the island without his phone or keys. These are the kinds of procedural questions that investigative journalists and advocacy attorneys raise in high-profile cases all the time. Whether they hold up depends entirely on facts this show does not have access to, the sealed file. We are not in a position to confirm or deny them, and neither, frankly, is anyone else outside that investigation. Personal theories about what happened. Separately, and at much greater length, the interview advanced a specific personal theory: that Nolan was killed, that his death was intentional, and that it should be prosecuted as a hate crime and a lynching under federal law. This theory was presented not as a question but as a conclusion, alongside a specific timeline the commentator constructed himself from public statements and interpretations of a released assistance call that he described as evidence of a cover-up in progress. Direct claims about named individuals. The interview named specific teenagers who were on the boat trip or connected to it, and asserted, in strong terms, that they were responsible, that they were lying, and that they should face life in prison under federal hate crime and anti-lynching statutes. We are choosing, deliberately, not to repeat those specific claims about named individuals in this script, and here is exactly why. This channel has one rule that does not bend for view counts. We separate what is confirmed from what is alleged, and we extend the presumption of innocence to anyone who has not been charged with a crime. That rule exists for a reason, and this case is the clearest possible illustration of why. No one has been arrested in connection with Nolan Wells's death. No one has been named a suspect by Jackson County investigators. The sealed autopsy, the sealed toxicology report, and the sealed witness statements are not available to Dr. Umar Johnson, to this channel, or to anyone else outside the investigation and the family's own legal team. A theory built without access to that file, no matter how detailed, how confident, or how many views it earns, is still a theory. There is also a real-world consequence unfolding right now that makes this point for us better than we could ourselves. Attorneys representing some of the teenagers who were with Nolan that day have publicly stated they intend to pursue legal action against people they believe have defamed their clients online. In a statement provided to the Sun-Herald, the attorneys said they would hold accountable, to the maximum extent of the law, anyone continuing what they characterized as spreading falsehoods about the young men from Ocean Springs, while stating that their own focus would remain on the facts, specifically, their position that these individuals had no involvement whatsoever in Nolan's death. We are not in a position to referee that dispute. We don't have the sealed file either. But that development is itself the update. A viral interview accusing named, uncharged individuals of a specific violent crime is now facing the threat of defamation litigation. That is precisely the risk this channel avoids by declining to repeat unverified accusations against private individuals as though they were established fact, regardless of who is making them, how sincerely they believe them, or how many people are listening. None of this means the procedural questions raised in that interview are worthless. Why certain boats weren't treated as part of the physical evidence collection, why a phone and keys were left behind, why the timeline has gaps. Those are fair questions for investigative reporters and fair questions for a grand jury. We can report that those questions exist and that they remain publicly unanswered by Jackson County authorities. What we won't do is convert one commentator's personal conclusion about who is guilty into narrated fact on this channel. That distinction between an open question and a private accusation is the entire difference between responsible coverage and the kind of content that ends up in a defamation complaint. So what has actually changed in the confirmed record since the last update on this channel? A few things, and they matter. On August 7th, two of the teenagers who were with Nolan on July 4th, Warren Hudson and a friend identified as Jax Patalo, traveled back out to Horn Island, accompanied by their attorneys, Edward Paltzik and J. Tyler Cox. According to statements the attorneys gave to CNN, the stated purpose of the trip was to examine the island's layout and physical dynamics in person. It is not entirely clear from public reporting how far that unofficial, attorney-organized investigation is intended to go, or what it's meant to produce. That same week, Attorney Benjamin Crump announced that the Mississippi Board of Nursing had closed an anonymous professional misconduct complaint that had been filed against Christine Wells Wansley, Nolan's mother, who works in the local healthcare system. That complaint, filed anonymously during the exact weeks his mother was pushing for answers about her son's death, had drawn its own wave of public criticism, with many drawing comparisons to the harassment historically directed at grieving Black mothers in high-profile Mississippi cases. Its closure removes one additional pressure his family had been dealing with alongside the investigation itself. Investigators have said publicly that they have now interviewed approximately 60 witnesses as part of the case. The district attorney's office has not given a public timeline for when the sealed evidence will be presented to a grand jury, or when that body might reach a decision. And the friends connected to the trip have not stayed silent either. Warren Hudson has given at least one public podcast interview addressing the case, and other friends have appeared on other platforms pushing back specifically against the narrative that race played a role in Nolan's death, a claim the Wells family's legal team has continued to raise publicly, citing what they've described as contradictions in the investigation and the broader historical context of Mississippi. That is the state of the public record as of this update. Two competing autopsy conclusions, both incomplete by design. A sealed investigative file waiting on a grand jury with no announced date. A family that has now had to fight both for answers about their son and against a licensing complaint filed against the mother herself. And a group of friends who, through their own attorneys, are now threatening legal action against people spreading claims the friends say are false. Nobody has been charged. Nobody has been cleared. That sentence has now been true for more than a month, and it remains true tonight. Here is the honest accounting, laid out plainly, of what remains unknown in the case of Nolan Wells as of this update. We don't know the official cause or manner of death because the state's autopsy is sealed pending grand jury review. We don't know what the independent forensic examination found beyond its stated undetermined conclusion. We don't know whether the grand jury process will result in criminal charges against anyone or against no one. We don't know the full contents of the witness interviews conducted so far, or what, if anything, they establish about the hours between early afternoon and Nolan's disappearance. And we don't know, despite an hour of confident assertions from one of the internet's most watched commentators, what actually happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island on July 4th. What we do know is this. A mother said goodbye to her son on an ordinary night and never got to say hello again. A community turned out for a memorial service at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs on July 20th to remember a young man who played football, who made his family dinner the night before a holiday, and who was, by every account from people who actually knew him, well loved. And in the months since, That family has had to navigate a sealed investigation, a fabricated toxicology report, AI-generated videos built from their own faces, an anonymous complaint filed against a grieving mother's nursing license, and now a legal standoff between a viral interview and the attorneys representing the young men it named. This channel will keep tracking this case the way we track every case, waiting for the confirmed record to catch up to the headlines, not the other way around. When the grand jury acts, when the sealed autopsy is released, when charges are filed or the case is closed without them, we will bring you that update, sourced and verified, the same way we've brought you every update on this case so far. Until then, the most honest thing anyone can tell you about what happened to Nolan Wells is also the hardest thing to sit with. We don't know yet. Anyone who tells you they do, without access to a sealed state file, is telling you what they believe, not what has been established. If this update helped you understand where this case actually stands, separate from the noise around it, that's exactly what this channel exists to do. Like this video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next confirmed update the moment it breaks.
Nolan Wells, how you feel about that situation?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Nolan Wells. You know, when the case first broke, Art, I just kind of sat back because I knew the YouTubian struggle streamers were going to run with it. I knew the white liberals on YouTube were going to run with it. I knew the white racists on YouTube were going to run with it, and everybody in between. It hurts my heart for Sister Christine, Nolan's mother, to have to see so many people using her son's name and crisis and tragedy for clickbait. And that's one of the biggest reasons, Art, I kind of stood back. It almost reminded me of the Freddie Gray police unaliving in Baltimore back during the Barack Obama era. When Freddie Gray lost his life to those police in Baltimore, everybody rushed to Baltimore. They did the same thing with Michael Brown in Ferguson, not because they necessarily cared about the tragedy, but because they wanted to benefit personally from it. And so I stayed away from Ferguson. I stayed away from Baltimore. And I stayed away from the Nolan Wells situation for a while because I didn't want to look like so many other people who just jumped in to have something to say, to use that young man's loss of life for clickbait and views.